Hello, dear listeners. Welcome to the English Globe. It's wonderful to have you here with us today. This is the place where we explore important global stories while helping you improve your English listening and understanding skills. Whether you're learning English for school, work, or personal growth, our goal is to guide you step by step through meaningful and interesting topics that shape today's world. We want you to learn English through real events, real conversations, and clear explanations that make complicated ideas much easier to understand.
That's right, Adam. And today's episode focuses on one of the biggest questions in international relations: why America and China can't trust each other anymore. This is a topic that affects global politics, global business, new technologies, and even the daily lives of ordinary people around the world. When two of the most powerful nations on Earth struggle to trust each other, the impact doesn't stay in one place. It spreads across continents, markets, and societies, shaping how the future might look for all of us.
Exactly. Many people hear about US-China tensions on the news, but they don't always understand the deeper reasons behind it. Trust between countries isn't based on feelings. It's based on actions, communication, cooperation, and predictable behavior. When those things begin to break down, nations start to question each other's intentions. Today, we'll explain everything in simple and clear English so that you can understand what's happening, why it's happening, and how it affects the world.
Before we dive into our conversation, dear listeners, we kindly ask you to take a quick moment to support our work. If you enjoy educational podcasts and want to continue improving your English with meaningful global stories, please give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to the English Globe, and click the notification bell so you never miss our future episodes. Your support truly helps us reach more learners around the world.
And we'd love to hear from you in the comments. Tell us where you're listening from and what you think about today's topic. Do you believe the United States and China can rebuild trust in the future? Or do you think the tension will continue to grow? Your comments help our community stay active and connected, and they often inspire ideas for future episodes.
Now, let's begin by understanding why this topic matters. The relationship between the United States and China is one of the most important in today's world. These two countries have the largest economies, the strongest global influence, and the most advanced technology development. When they cooperate, the world becomes more stable. But when they don't trust each other, global uncertainty rises, affecting trade, technology, travel, education, and international security.
For example, when trust declines, companies may hesitate to invest, students may worry about visas, and governments may create new rules to protect their industries. Even the price of everyday products, phones, laptops, clothing, or food, can be influenced by US-China relations. You might be thousands of kilometers away from both countries, but their decisions still affect your life, your economy, and your future opportunities.
Exactly. And understanding why trust is breaking down helps us understand the world better. Countries don't trust or distrust each other overnight. These things happen slowly, influenced by politics, military actions, economic competition, and even differences in communication styles. Today, we will break all these ideas into simple explanations so that English learners can follow along without difficulty.
That's why this episode is important. We're not here to take sides or support one country over the other. Our goal is to help you learn English and understand global issues in a neutral, educational, and respectful way. We will talk about technology competition, trade conflicts, diplomatic challenges, and different political systems, all explained step by step in a calm and clear manner.
So, in today's episode, we will guide you through the main reasons behind the trust problem, how history shaped the relationship, how economic expectations changed over time, why technology competition has become so intense, and how global influence plays a role in modern international affairs. By the end of this episode, you will have a much clearer understanding of why trust has weakened and what this could mean for the future of the world.
And of course, as always, we will explain useful vocabulary along the way, help you understand important terms, and give you examples that make everything easier to remember. Learning English through real global stories is one of the most effective ways to build strong listening skills, and we're excited to share this journey with you.
Beautifully said, Adam. Now that our introduction is complete, let's begin exploring how the United States and China reached this difficult moment. To understand why trust is breaking down today, we first need to look at how their relationship started and how it changed over the last few decades.
Before we explore why America and China struggle to trust each other today, it's important to understand where their relationship began and how it evolved over the past 50 years. The story goes back to the early 1970s, at a time when the world was deeply divided by politics and ideology. In 1972, U.S. President Richard Nixon made a historic visit to China, something that surprised the entire world. This visit opened a door that had been closed for decades and marked the beginning of official diplomatic relations between the two countries.
That visit wasn't just symbolic. It completely changed the direction of international politics. Before Nixon's trip, China and the United States had almost no communication. They had different political systems, different worldviews, and very little contact. But both sides understood that cooperation could bring benefits, especially during a time when global tensions were high. That first handshake between American and Chinese leaders created a foundation that would later grow into one of the most important economic relationships in modern history.
Exactly. After diplomatic relations were formally established in 1979, China began opening its economy to the world. The Chinese government launched major reforms aimed at attracting foreign investment, improving manufacturing, and connecting with global markets. Many American companies saw an opportunity and began building factories, opening offices, and creating business partnerships in China. This cooperation helped China grow rapidly while giving U.S. companies access to a huge labor force and a new consumer market.
And this cooperation didn't happen overnight. It slowly developed over decades as trust between the two countries increased. American companies brought technology, business experience, and investment. China offered manufacturing strength, affordable production, and a growing population eager to work and improve their standard of living. By the 1990s and early 2000s, this relationship had become extremely strong. China became known as the world's factory, producing everything from clothes to electronics.
For the United States, this cooperation meant lower prices for consumers, higher profits for companies, and access to new global markets. For China, it meant jobs, economic development, and a pathway to becoming one of the fastest-growing economies in the world. Millions of people in China moved out of poverty thanks to this economic transformation, and American consumers benefited from affordable products in almost every industry.
And let's not forget the technology side of this partnership. As trade grew, so did cooperation in technology, research, and production. American technology companies relied on Chinese factories to build devices like computers, phones, and home appliances. At the same time, Chinese companies learned modern production methods and advanced skills from working with international partners. This exchange helped accelerate China's modernization and strengthen the global supply chains that make everyday products available around the world.
During this period, both countries believed that cooperation would lead to long-term benefits. The U.S. expected that strong economic ties would encourage China to become more open, more connected, and more aligned with global markets. China expected that working with the United States would help it grow, modernize, and eventually take a larger role in international affairs. This period of trust became the foundation of the global economy we know today.
In fact, by the early 2000s, the relationship was so strong that China joined the World Trade Organization, opening the door to even more trade, investment, and global integration. Many economists describe this time as a golden period of US-China cooperation. Factories were booming, trade numbers were rising, and both countries depended on each other to keep their economies stable and growing.
But while things looked positive on the surface, deeper concerns were slowly beginning to appear. As China continued to grow, some American industries felt threatened. Jobs moved overseas, manufacturing centers in the US began to shrink, and many people started to question whether this economic partnership was truly balanced. Still, for many years, both countries believed that cooperation was the best path forward, and trust, although imperfect, remained strong.
This history is important because it helps us understand how much both sides gained from working together. It also explains why today's tension feels so serious. When a relationship is built over decades, involves millions of workers, and shapes global trade, losing trust becomes a major global issue. The world watched America and China grow closer for nearly half a century, and now the world is watching them grow apart.
So, the key thing to remember is this. The trust between America and China didn't just appear suddenly. It was built slowly through communication, trade, investment, and shared economic interests. And the loss of that trust also didn't happen overnight. It developed as both countries' goals changed, their ambitions grew, and their expectations shifted.
In the next part of our discussion, we'll explore how this stable partnership transformed into a strategic rivalry and why the peaceful cooperation of the past turned into the competition we see today. Understanding this history makes the present much clearer, and it helps us see why trust has become such a complicated issue between these two global powers.
To understand why America and China can't fully trust each other today, we need to look at how the relationship changed as China began to grow at an extraordinary speed. For many years, both countries believed cooperation was beneficial, but as China's economy expanded, its global influence expanded too. This wasn't a small or gradual rise. It was one of the fastest economic transformations in human history. Factories multiplied, new industries appeared, and China's cities modernized so quickly that the entire balance of global power slowly began to shift.
And this shift made many countries, especially the United States, pay much closer attention. So, Adam, for our English learners, could you explain in simple words why China's rise changed global power dynamics?
Of course, Julia. In simple terms, when a country becomes richer, stronger, and more advanced, it begins to play a bigger role in the world. China's growth meant it wasn't just a manufacturing center anymore. It became a country with major technological goals, military modernization programs, and long-term global ambitions. And when a new power rises, the existing power, in this case, the United States, naturally becomes more cautious and protective of its leadership position. This shift from cooperation to competition is what we call strategic competition.
That makes sense. And many learners might wonder, how exactly did this competition show up in real life? What areas created the biggest tension?
Great question. The first major area is trade and the economy. For a long time, American companies relied on Chinese factories to produce goods cheaply. But as China developed its own industries and companies, it began competing directly with the United States in global markets. Chinese companies became stronger in electronics, automobiles, machinery, and many other fields. The U.S. began to worry that some American industries might lose their leadership positions.
So China wasn't just making products. It was starting to challenge American companies.
Exactly. And the challenge became even more serious in technology, which is the second area of competition. Both countries understood that future global power would depend on things like artificial intelligence, advanced microchips, electric vehicles, clean energy technologies, and space innovation. China invested heavily in these areas, trying to become a leader in technology rather than just a manufacturer. The U.S., seeing this rapid progress, started protecting its own technology industries more carefully,
Technology is a big deal because it shapes the future. But what about military influence? Many people hear this in the news, but don't fully understand it.
That's the third major area. As China became wealthier, it also strengthened its military to protect its interests and expand its presence, especially in the Asia-Pacific region. The United States has long been the dominant military power in that region, working closely with countries like Japan, South Korea, and Australia. So when China began expanding its capabilities, building modern naval ships, improving air power, and increasing its global security presence, the U.S. saw it as a direct challenge to its traditional influence.
So this competition is happening in trade, in technology, and even in regional security. But for English learners, could you explain why the US views China as a challenger and not just another strong country?
Absolutely. The U.S. sees China as a challenger because China is not only becoming powerful, but also shaping global systems in ways that reflect its own values and interests. For example, China promotes large international projects like the Belt and Road Initiative, which expands its economic influence across Asia, Africa, and parts of Europe. Meanwhile, the U.S. has long played the leading role in global organizations, trade systems, and security alliances. So when China offers new alternatives, it shifts how global power works.
And this creates competition because both countries want to influence the future of international rules and systems.
Exactly. When two major powers want to lead the world in different ways, competition naturally grows. This doesn't mean conflict is inevitable. It simply means both sides are trying to protect their interests, expand their influence, and secure their future position.
Let me ask one more question for our learners. Why does this shift from cooperation to competition matter for ordinary people around the world?
It matters because the decisions these two countries make influence global prices, global trade, technology access, job opportunities, and even the stability of international peace. If the US and China cooperate, the world economy becomes more stable. But if they compete aggressively, countries everywhere feel the effects, from currency changes to supply chain disruptions to political uncertainty. So even if someone lives far from both countries, the competition still affects everyday life.
That's a powerful reminder. Understanding this competition helps us understand global politics, global finance, and even the products we use every day. For English learners, it also helps build vocabulary related to international relations, economics, and global development.
And that's why this topic is such an important part of today's episode. China's rise didn't just change its own destiny, it reshaped the entire world. The United States, as the long-standing global leader, now faces a competitor unlike any it has encountered in the modern era. This shift sets the stage for all the trust issues, strategic tensions, and diplomatic challenges we see today.
Beautifully explained, Adam. Now that we've understood how strategic competition began, we can move into the deeper reasons behind growing mistrust. In the next part, we'll explore the economic tensions that pushed both sides further apart and made cooperation harder than before.
As we continue exploring why trust between the United States and China has weakened, we need to focus on one of the most sensitive parts of their relationship: technology and security. In today's world, technology is not just about smartphones, computers, or electric cars. It is also about national power, economic strength, and global leadership. When a country controls advanced technology, it gains influence, stability, and the ability to shape the future. That is why both the US and China are extremely careful and protective when it comes to technology leadership.
That's true, Adam. And many English learners often hear words like AI, microchips, cybersecurity, and data protection in the news. But they might not fully understand why these terms are connected to trust issues between countries. Could you explain why technology competition is such a big concern for both sides?
Of course. Let's start with AI, artificial intelligence. AI has become one of the most important tools in the modern world. It helps businesses innovate, helps governments manage services, and even supports scientific research. But AI can also be used in areas like national security, defense planning, and cybersecurity. Because of these dual uses, both countries worry that the other might use advanced AI systems in ways that could give them a strategic advantage. When both sides want to lead in the same powerful technology, competition naturally grows.
That makes a lot of sense. And one of the most important technologies in this competition is microchips, right?
Exactly. Microchips, or semiconductors, are the tiny parts inside every electronic device: phones, computers, cars, medical machines, and even military equipment. Without microchips, the modern world simply wouldn't function. The United States has historically been a leader in chip design, while other regions such as East Asia have been strong in manufacturing. China, seeing the importance of chips for national development, has been investing heavily to become more independent in chip production. The U.S. worries that advanced chips could strengthen China's technological and military abilities, while China worries about relying on foreign companies for essential technology. This creates tension on both sides.
Another topic that often appears in the news is cybersecurity. Some listeners might wonder what cybersecurity has to do with trust.
Cybersecurity is extremely important because countries want to protect their data, communications, and critical systems. When nations do not fully trust each other, they become more cautious about how technology is used, where it is produced, and who controls the information. The U.S. has expressed concerns about data security and the possible misuse of digital systems, while China has emphasized the need to protect its own technology ecosystem and maintain national security. This mutual concern leads to restrictions, regulations, and protective policies from both governments.
So both countries feel the need to protect their technology, their data, and their digital networks?
Exactly. And this leads us to another major issue: supply chains. A supply chain is the long path a product takes from raw materials to factories and finally to customers. For technology, supply chains are global. Materials might come from one country, manufacturing might happen in another, and software might be developed somewhere else. If two countries do not trust each other, they become worried that supply chains could be disrupted or used in ways that might create risk. The U.S. is concerned about depending too much on Chinese manufacturing, and China is concerned about depending on American-designed technologies. This mutual dependence creates anxiety, especially when political tensions rise.
It sounds like both sides want to make sure they are not vulnerable or dependent in areas that matter for their future.
Right. And this brings us to the idea of tech leadership. Technology leadership is about who creates the future, who develops the next generation of clean energy, who builds the safest networks, who designs the fastest chips, and who leads global platforms. Both the U.S. and China want to be at the front of this race, not because they want confrontation, but because technology leadership brings economic opportunities, national pride, and strategic influence.
For our English learners, can you explain what strategic influence means in simple words?
Of course. Strategic influence means having the ability to shape decisions, trends, and systems in the world. For example, if a country leads in 5G networks, it might set the standards for how communication systems work globally. If a country leads in AI, it might shape how businesses and researchers use that technology. So leadership gives a country a louder voice on the world stage.
That's very clear. And it also shows why both sides are so cautious. Because if one country becomes the leader in too many important technologies, the other might feel uncertain about its future position.
Exactly. And uncertainty is one of the biggest reasons trust becomes fragile. When both sides worry about losing control over essential technologies, they create policies to protect themselves. The U.S. restricts some high-tech exports to China, and China develops its own systems to avoid relying on American companies. These actions are not about confrontation, they are about self-protection. But while they strengthen security, they also reduce trust.
So to summarize in simple terms, both countries want to protect their technology, secure their digital information, and lead in areas like AI and microchips. Because of this, each side becomes cautious, and that caution creates more distance and less trust.
Exactly, Julia. And that is why technology has become one of the most sensitive parts of the US-China relationship. It's not only about who makes the most advanced products. It's about who controls the future systems that the world will depend on. And when so much is at stake, even small disagreements can turn into major tensions.
Thank you, Adam. This explanation helps our listeners understand why technology competition is not just a business topic. It is a global issue with deep political and security dimensions. In the next section, we'll look at how economic pressure and trade concerns added even more tension to the relationship.
When we talk about military tensions between the United States and China, we are really talking about a large geographic area in the Pacific Ocean, where many countries share borders, sea routes, and important shipping lanes, and this wide region becomes a central point of attention because it connects global trade, international travel, and national security, which is why both nations want to make sure they have enough presence there to protect their interests, without creating unnecessary conflict or misunderstandings that could make the situation more complicated for the entire world.
For English learners who might be hearing these ideas for the first time, it is helpful to imagine the Pacific region as a huge neighborhood where many countries live close to each other. And in this neighborhood, the United States has long been a major security partner for allies such as Japan, South Korea, Australia, and the Philippines, while China, as a rising global power, has been increasing its influence and activity. And when both sides try to protect their own space at the same time, it sometimes creates tension, even if no one wants a direct confrontation.
One of the reasons the Pacific region becomes so important is that a large percentage of global trade passes through these waters every day, and countries depend on safe, open sea routes to move goods like food, electronics, machinery, energy resources, and raw materials. So when major powers increase their naval activity in the area, it raises questions about how to maintain safety, how to prevent accidents, and how to make sure all nations can continue using these international waters without facing pressure or uncertainty that might disrupt the smooth flow of global commerce.
Many learners may wonder why the United States and China want to have strong navies in the same part of the world, and the answer becomes clearer when we think about national defense strategies that try to prepare for any possible challenge, because a country with powerful naval forces can protect shipping routes, respond to emergencies, support regional allies, and make sure that no sudden change threatens stability, which is why both sides feel it is necessary to maintain a visible presence, even though they also say they want peace and open communication.
When two countries operate advanced ships, aircraft, and patrol systems in the same region, they need very careful rules to prevent misunderstandings, because even small mistakes, such as a ship coming too close or a pilot misreading a signal, can create unnecessary tension. So diplomats and military leaders spend a lot of time discussing how to avoid miscommunication, how to share information when needed, and how to reduce risks through professional and predictable behavior that keeps everyone safe.
Many people hear the phrase naval competition and imagine dramatic images, but in reality, much of it involves quiet movements, surveillance activities, and routine patrols where ships simply monitor the environment, practice navigation, or conduct training. And although these activities are normal for military forces, the presence of two powerful nations doing similar operations in the same area can create pressure unless communication stays open and respectful, which is why international safety guidelines are so important.
Another major reason the Pacific region attracts attention is that several countries in the area rely on security partnerships with larger powers, and this sometimes places the United States and China in situations where they support different strategies or viewpoints, not because they want conflict, but because each side has its own alliances, values, and long-term goals. And these differences can create friction if not handled carefully, which is why diplomacy becomes a vital tool for reducing misunderstandings and promoting long-term stability.
It is important to reassure learners that even though we often hear about military developments in this region, both nations regularly say publicly that they want peace, stability, and open dialogue. And most activities that take place are meant to signal readiness rather than aggression. So the challenge becomes finding the right balance between protecting national interests and avoiding actions that could make other countries feel nervous or uncertain about what might happen next in the region.
When we speak about defensive strategies, we are talking about how each country prepares to respond to challenges without necessarily wanting to start any confrontation. And in the Pacific, this means using defensive systems, building partnerships with nearby nations, and developing technologies that help monitor the area, because having reliable information and strong communication reduces the chance of mistakes, increases safety, and helps maintain stable conditions even when tensions rise due to political disagreements or economic competition.
For people studying English, one of the helpful ways to understand this situation is to compare it to two large companies operating in the same market, because even if they want to attract customers and grow their influence, they still need shared rules, fair competition, and clear expectations to avoid damaging the entire business environment. And similarly, when the United States and China both operate in the Pacific region, they need respectful management of military relations to ensure that the broader international community continues to enjoy peace, trade, and open cooperation.
What matters most for the world is that these tensions remain controlled, predictable, and managed through diplomacy, because the Pacific region is home to millions of people, dozens of cultures, and many growing economies, and maintaining stability allows countries to focus on education, development, technology, and economic growth rather than worrying about escalation. And this is why leaders from both sides often meet with regional partners to discuss joint concerns and improve communication whenever possible.
As we move through this podcast, understanding the Pacific region helps us see how geography shapes global politics, because countries do not make decisions in isolation, and every action taken on the water, whether it involves patrols, training, or diplomatic visits, sends a message about intentions, reliability, and long-term plans. And by studying these patterns in a simple and educational way, learners become more aware of how major powers manage responsibility in shared spaces that affect the entire world.
Over the last decade, trade disagreements between the United States and China became stronger because both countries started paying closer attention to how goods were produced, how markets were accessed, and how economic policies affected domestic workers. And this shift led to a series of new rules, negotiations, and protective measures that created tension, even though both nations continued buying enormous amounts of products from each other due to deep economic connections that had been built over many years of cooperation.
For English learners who want a simple explanation, trade conflicts happen when two countries feel that the exchange of goods, services, or technology is no longer fair or balanced. And this feeling grew on both sides as companies expanded globally, as supply chains became more complex, and as economic competition increased. So the disagreements were not just political arguments, but real concerns about jobs, manufacturing, long-term growth, and national strategies for economic strength.
One of the most visible signs of growing tension was the use of tariffs, which are extra taxes placed on imported goods to make them more expensive. And when both countries applied these tariffs on hundreds of products, it changed the price of everyday items, influenced business decisions, and pushed many companies to rethink where factories should be located, how materials should be sourced, and which markets would be most stable for long-term investment.
In simple terms, tariffs work like a barrier that slows down trade because the added cost can make buyers hesitate. And when the United States and China both used this tool, manufacturers, farmers, technology firms, and transportation companies all felt the pressure. So it became clear that the economic relationship was entering a new phase where security concerns, national interest, and global competition were influencing decisions much more than before.
Another major factor in the conflict involves supply chains, which are the long sequences of steps that take a product from raw material to final delivery, and because many American companies rely on Chinese factories for manufacturing, while many Chinese companies rely on American technology and high-value components. Even small disruptions in the relationship created large challenges, pushing businesses to spread production across more countries to reduce risks and maintain stability in an increasingly uncertain environment.
For example, when a company that produces electronics cannot get a specific part from one country on time, it affects the entire production line. So these supply chain concerns made governments more focused on economic security, and they started encouraging industries to diversify, strengthen domestic production, and reduce dependence on any single supplier, even though fully separating the two economies remains extremely difficult because of how interconnected they have become.
Economic mistrust grew as both nations began questioning whether the other side was playing fairly in areas like technology, intellectual property, market access, and investment rules. And although officials from both countries regularly meet to discuss these issues, the disagreements continue because each side has its own priorities, values, and long-term plans for economic leadership in an increasingly competitive global environment.
It is important to highlight for learners that mistrust does not always mean that countries refuse to trade with each other, because the United States and China still exchange hundreds of billions of dollars worth of goods every year, and countless businesses continue working together. But the relationship now includes more caution, more regulations, and more careful decision-making as both sides try to protect their national interests while keeping essential economic links open.
One of the most interesting aspects of this situation is that even though both governments argue over trade policies, the two economies remain deeply connected because American consumers rely heavily on affordable products made in Chinese factories, while Chinese manufacturers rely on the massive buying power of the American market. And this mutual dependence creates a situation where neither side can simply disconnect without causing significant economic disruption at home.
Furthermore, many industries rely on cooperation to continue innovating, especially in areas like electronics, clean energy, medical equipment, and automotive technology. And this cooperation pushes both countries to find ways to manage conflict without cutting off opportunities for growth. Because global markets work best when stability allows businesses to plan confidently for the future, rather than worrying about sudden changes in policy or unpredictable shifts in trade rules.
Another reason economic dependence remains strong is that investments flow in both directions, with companies establishing partnerships, research centers, and distribution networks that make business cooperation not only useful, but necessary for long-term competitiveness. And even when tensions rise, these commercial relationships continue because the economic benefits are too large to ignore, creating a balance where conflict and cooperation exist at the same time.
For English learners, it is helpful to remember that trade conflicts do not necessarily mean the relationship is broken, but instead, they show that both countries want to shape the future of their economies in ways that protect workers, promote innovation, and strengthen their international position. And although disagreements can create pressure, the deep economic dependence between the United States and China often motivates both sides to eventually negotiate, adjust, and find workable compromises that prevent unnecessary damage to global markets.
In the end, the story of trade conflicts and economic dependence between these two nations teaches us that global economics is complex, connected, and constantly changing. And even when cooperation becomes difficult, the essential ties between consumers, workers, factories, researchers, and companies remain strong, pushing both sides to find ways to manage tension, rebuild trust where possible, and maintain a stable foundation for future growth that benefits people around the world. As we continue exploring the complex relationship between the United States and China, it's important to understand another dimension of their competition: global influence and international partnerships. Influence is not just about military strength or trade. It's about how countries work with each other, how they build alliances, and how they try to shape international rules and standards. Both the US and China are competing to have the strongest voice in global affairs, which allows them to protect their interests and also guide the future of the international system in ways that reflect their priorities, values, and economic goals.
For our English learners, Adam, could you explain in simple words what we mean by global influence?
Sure, Julia. Global influence means the ability of a country to affect decisions, trends, or actions in other countries. For example, if one country builds schools, hospitals, or roads in another country, it gains influence because people and leaders often respect, trust, or cooperate with the country providing support. Influence also comes from trade agreements, cultural exchanges, and participation in international organizations. It is a way for countries to encourage others to make decisions that align with their interests without using force or threats.
That's clear. And when we talk about the United States and China, this competition for influence has grown a lot in recent years. For example, China launched the Belt and Road Initiative, which invests in infrastructure in dozens of countries across Asia, Africa, and Europe, while the United States has long had strong partnerships with countries like Japan, South Korea, and members of NATO. Both countries want to strengthen their relationships with other nations because having partners around the world gives them more economic, political, and strategic options.
Exactly. And this is where diplomacy becomes a central part of global influence. By building relationships, signing agreements, and participating in international organizations, countries can extend their reach and encourage cooperation. The United States often promotes democratic values, human rights, and open markets in its partnerships, while China emphasizes development, investment opportunities, and mutually beneficial trade arrangements. Both approaches attract countries in different ways, and some countries carefully balance their relationships with both superpowers to maximize benefits.
For English learners, it's helpful to know that partnership doesn't always mean a formal agreement. Sometimes it simply means cooperating on projects, exchanging knowledge, or supporting each other in international forums like the United Nations. These partnerships help countries gain security, economic benefits, and recognition in the global community. And they also influence how other nations respond when there is tension between the United States and China.
Yes, and it's fascinating to see how different countries respond. Some nations choose to align more closely with one side, while others try to remain neutral and benefit from both. For example, countries in Southeast Asia, like Vietnam or Indonesia, maintain strong economic ties with China but also participate in security agreements with the United States. Similarly, many African and Latin American countries welcome Chinese investment while also trading with the United States. This balancing act shows how nations carefully consider their own interests while navigating the competition between the two superpowers.
Another example of global influence is technology partnerships. Many countries depend on either Chinese or American companies for important technologies, such as telecommunications networks, energy solutions, or transportation infrastructure. Choosing one partner over another can sometimes be a political decision, as well as an economic one. For instance, some countries adopted Chinese 5G technology, while others preferred American or European providers. These choices reflect how international influence extends beyond diplomacy into everyday life, business, and national planning.
It's also worth noting that cultural influence plays a role. The United States has long exported its movies, music, and education system, which increases its global presence in a way that shapes perceptions, values, and social trends. China, meanwhile, has been investing in cultural programs, language schools, media partnerships, and international exchanges to promote its culture and perspectives. These soft power strategies create trust and goodwill, which is another form of influence that complements economic and political initiatives.
For learners, soft power is an important term. It means influencing other countries through culture, ideas, and cooperation, rather than using military force or direct pressure. Soft power is one of the reasons countries can have a strong international presence without creating conflict, and it often works together with trade, investment, and partnerships to increase trust and visibility.
Exactly, Julia. However, this competition also creates challenges. When countries feel pressured to choose sides, they might worry about losing access to markets, investment, or technology. At the same time, superpowers need to avoid pushing other countries into making hard choices that could increase tension. This delicate balance is why global influence is complex. It's not about domination, but about maintaining relationships, encouraging cooperation, and promoting one's interests while minimizing conflict.
In simple words, global influence is like trying to be a respected neighbor in a big city. You want others to listen to you, trust your advice, and cooperate with you. But you must also respect the needs and choices of others to keep relationships positive. Both the United States and China are doing this on a global scale, and their actions affect billions of people around the world, from governments to businesses to everyday citizens.
Exactly. And understanding this helps English learners see how international competition works beyond headlines. It is not just about politics or economics. It's about relationships, trust, cooperation, and influence. When countries build partnerships and maintain connections, they create opportunities for growth, security, and shared progress, even when tensions exist elsewhere.
So, as we study global influence and international partnerships, we can see that the United States and China are constantly working to expand their presence, gain allies, and shape global systems. But the competition is balanced by mutual interdependence, economic needs, and the desire to maintain stability. For learners, this is an excellent example of how diplomacy, trade, culture, and strategic thinking are all connected in the modern world.
Yes, Julia. And this understanding prepares us for the next section, where we will explore the role of diplomacy and negotiations, and how both countries attempt to manage conflict, build trust, and reduce misunderstandings despite strategic competition, which is essential for anyone wanting to understand international relations and global events in today's interconnected world. As we continue exploring the reasons why trust between the United States and China has weakened, it is important to consider how political differences shape the relationship. The United States has a democratic system where leaders are elected, power is divided among branches of government, and public debate is encouraged. China, on the other hand, has a single-party system where the government plays a strong role in guiding economic development, social policies, and national priorities. These differences are important because they influence how decisions are made, how policies are explained to the public, and how each country interacts with other nations.
For English learners, it is helpful to think of these differences as two teams playing the same game but following different rules. The US system values transparency, debate, and checks and balances, while China's system emphasizes long-term planning, centralized coordination, and stability. These differences are not about right or wrong. They are about different approaches to running a country, and understanding them helps us see why misunderstandings often happen between governments.
Exactly, Julia. When leaders from different political systems communicate, they may have different priorities, expectations, and ways of expressing themselves. For example, a public statement in the United States may be framed to show debate or disagreement, while a statement in China may be framed to show unity and consistent planning. These differences can create confusion if not interpreted carefully, And what one country sees as transparency or honesty, the other might interpret as criticism or a lack of trust.
Many learners also notice that media narratives can increase tension. News outlets often report stories in ways that reflect local interests, and headlines can sometimes exaggerate disagreements. For example, a routine diplomatic comment may be reported as a serious criticism, or a military exercise may be described as a provocative action, even if the countries involved consider it normal. This type of reporting can influence public perception and make trust harder to maintain, even when both sides intend to cooperate.
Yes, and communication problems are not only about words, but also about timing and cultural context. In diplomacy, small differences in phrasing, tone, or emphasis can be interpreted very differently. A statement meant to be neutral can be read as aggressive, and a policy announcement intended for domestic audiences can be misunderstood internationally. Because both countries are constantly under global scrutiny, even minor miscommunications can quickly gain attention and influence how trust is perceived.
For English learners, it's useful to remember that communication styles vary in every culture, not just between countries. Some cultures prefer direct, detailed explanations, while others prioritize context, relationships, and subtlety. When these styles meet in international relations, misunderstandings are natural, especially when combined with language differences, media reporting, and public expectations.
Another factor is that both countries have different approaches to long-term planning. The United States often balances short-term political cycles with strategic goals, while China focuses on multi-decade plans for economic, technological, and social development. When each country looks at the other through its own lens, policies can seem inconsistent, unpredictable, or even threatening, even when both sides are acting in what they believe to be responsible ways.
And when trust is low, these communication problems are amplified. Small disagreements or unclear statements can be interpreted as intentional provocations, which makes future negotiations more difficult. Diplomatic meetings, public speeches, and media reports all become part of a complex environment where both countries must carefully manage how they present their intentions, because even small misunderstandings can affect trade, security, and international partnerships.
Exactly. In simple words, political differences create a situation where even honest efforts to cooperate can be misunderstood. The two countries are speaking different political languages, and without careful interpretation, statements, policies, and actions may appear more confrontational than intended. This is why political systems, communication styles, and media narratives all play a key role in shaping trust between nations.
It's also important to note that while communication problems increase tension, they do not make cooperation impossible. Both countries continue to negotiate, exchange information, and work on global issues such as climate change, trade agreements, and public health. The challenge is making sure that communication is clear, culturally aware, and carefully interpreted to prevent unnecessary mistrust.
For English learners, this section is a great example of how understanding language, culture, and context is crucial not only in learning English, but also in understanding global affairs. Words, tone, and style all carry meaning beyond their literal definition, and by studying communication differences, we can see why countries sometimes struggle to trust each other even when their goals overlap in important ways.
So, to summarize, political differences, media narratives, and communication styles all affect trust. Misunderstandings are natural when countries have different systems, priorities, and cultural approaches, and managing these challenges requires patience, clarity, and attention to detail. By learning about these issues, our listeners can better understand international relations and also improve their own communication skills, which is a valuable lesson for English learners and global citizens alike.
Exactly, Julia. And with this understanding of political differences and communication problems, we are ready to explore the final section of our episode, where we discuss possible paths to trust, cooperation, and responsible global leadership in the U.S.-China relationship, which is essential for maintaining stability and promoting mutual understanding in an interconnected world. As we reach another part of today's discussion, it is important to look at how the lack of trust between the United States and China affects not only these two nations, but the entire world. Trust is a key element in international relations because it allows countries to cooperate on trade, technology, security, and education. When trust is reduced, the consequences can be felt globally, from the prices of everyday goods to the opportunities available to students, businesses, and travelers. This is why understanding the effects of tension is so important for anyone who wants to follow global events or learn English through real-world examples.
For English learners, it helps to think of the US and China as two major players in a global network. When they work together smoothly, the network functions well, goods flow easily, technology advances quickly, and people enjoy many benefits. But when trust declines, disruptions appear in almost every sector. For example, global trade can slow down because companies worry about tariffs, regulations, or supply chain interruptions, which can make products more expensive and less predictable for consumers in different countries.
Exactly. Let's take the example of technology. Many countries rely on American or Chinese companies for essential equipment, software, and innovation. When trust is low, companies may face restrictions, delays, or challenges accessing key technology, and this slows down global innovation. It also affects research collaborations, joint ventures, and international projects that depend on stable partnerships. Students, researchers, and engineers may encounter more difficulties in learning new technologies or participating in international programs because uncertainty between these two superpowers creates additional barriers.
Another effect is on businesses. Companies often plan long-term investments based on stable relationships between major powers. When tension rises, businesses may delay projects, diversify production to other countries, or even reconsider entering certain markets. This affects employment, production, and pricing globally. For learners, it's useful to understand that business decisions are not only influenced by money, but also by political trust, diplomatic relations, and international stability.
Travel is also impacted. Students who want to study abroad, professionals seeking international experience, and families planning visits may encounter new visa rules, stricter regulations, or changing policies because of tension between the US and China. Even though both countries encourage tourism and education exchange in many areas, political distrust can make processes slower and more complicated, demonstrating that global relations influence personal decisions and everyday experiences.
For countries outside the US and China, the lack of trust also requires careful balancing. Nations in Asia, Africa, Europe, and Latin America often maintain partnerships with both powers, seeking to benefit from economic opportunities, technology transfer, and diplomatic support, while avoiding the risks of being caught in conflicts or economic restrictions. This balancing act is difficult because even small policy changes in Washington or Beijing can influence decisions thousands of miles away, showing how deeply interconnected global systems are.
Yes, and this balancing is often a complex exercise in diplomacy. Some countries may choose to cooperate more closely with one power on trade while maintaining security partnerships with the other. Others may focus on technology collaborations with one nation while engaging in cultural or educational programs with the other. For English learners, this shows how international relations are not always simple. Countries constantly weigh advantages and risks to protect their own interests and the well-being of their citizens.
It's also important to note that these tensions impact everyday people. Prices of electronics, clothing, and even groceries can increase when trade is disrupted. Travel plans may become more expensive or complicated. Access to certain technologies or educational programs may face delays. Businesses may reduce hiring or shift operations, affecting job opportunities. All of these consequences demonstrate that even though the US and China are distant countries for many people, the effects of their relationship are very real in daily life.
Furthermore, when trust is low, global initiatives such as climate change projects, pandemic response, or international research collaborations may face delays or reduced participation. Cooperation in science, medicine, and renewable energy often relies on mutual trust, shared data, and predictable policies. When these elements are weakened, progress slows, and the world may struggle to respond efficiently to urgent challenges, showing that trust between major powers is crucial not only for trade and technology, but for solving global problems.
In simple terms, a lack of trust between the US and China creates uncertainty in many areas: economic stability, technological development, education, business planning, travel, and global problem-solving. Other nations must carefully navigate this uncertainty while pursuing their own goals. Individuals, students, and companies all feel the effects in practical ways, demonstrating that international relations are not abstract. They have tangible consequences for everyday life around the world.
Exactly, Julia. And understanding these effects is important for English learners because it connects language learning to real-world knowledge. By following global news, studying trade, and examining international cooperation, listeners can improve English skills while gaining insight into how policies, diplomacy, and trust impact people everywhere. This connection between learning and real-world context makes the study of international relations both practical and meaningful.
So, to summarize, the lack of trust between the United States and China influences global trade, technology, education, business, and travel. It also requires other countries to carefully balance relations and make strategic decisions. For everyday people, these tensions are felt through higher prices, limited access, and more complicated international processes, which is why paying attention to global trust and cooperation is essential for understanding the modern world.
Yes, Julia. And as we move into our final section, we will reflect on the key lessons from today's discussion, highlight important English vocabulary, and explore how listeners can use this knowledge to improve their understanding of global events and strengthen their English skills in meaningful ways. As we reach the final part of today's episode, let's take a moment to summarize everything we have discussed about why America and China can't trust each other as easily as before, and how this affects the entire world. We began by exploring the history of US-China relations, looking at how trust was built through diplomacy, trade, and cooperation since the 1970s. Then we examined how China's rapid growth created strategic competition, why technology and security concerns play an important role, and how military presence in the Pacific region adds complexity to the relationship.
Yes, Adam. We also explored economic issues, explaining how trade conflicts, tariffs, and supply chain challenges have grown stronger over the last decade, while at the same time showing that both countries still depend on each other economically. We discussed global influence, international partnerships, and how the competition for alliances around the world affects other nations, businesses, students, and travelers. Then, we explained how political differences and communication styles make misunderstandings more common, which adds to tension between these two superpowers.
Exactly. Finally, we examined how a lack of trust between the US and China impacts everyday life, from global trade to technology access, education opportunities, business decisions, and travel. Even countries far away from both powers need to balance relationships carefully, showing how interconnected the world has become. Understanding this topic helps listeners see why international relations are both complex and practical, and why studying global events is useful for improving English while also learning about the modern world.
For our English learners, today's episode also gave you the opportunity to learn several useful vocabulary words that appear often in international news. Let's highlight some of the most important ones. Trust, the confidence that another country will act responsibly and honor agreements. Diplomacy, the process of managing international relationships and resolving disagreements through discussion. Tariff, a tax on imported goods, often used in trade disputes. Supply chain, the sequence of steps involved in producing and delivering goods to the consumer. Influence, the ability to affect decisions, behavior, or events in another country. Soft power, the use of culture, education, and communication to influence other nations without force. Strategic competition, a situation where countries compete in multiple areas, including economics, technology, and military. Mistrust, a lack of confidence or suspicion about another country's intentions. Alliance, an agreement between countries to support each other politically, economically, or militarily. Interconnected, linked in a way that actions in one place affect outcomes in another. Diplomatic statement, an official public comment by a government or leader. Cooperation, working together to achieve common goals, even between countries with differences.
Exactly, Julia. We encourage all our listeners to practice these words by making simple sentences, writing short paragraphs, or discussing international topics with friends or classmates. Using these terms in context will help you remember them and understand news, articles, and global conversations more easily.
Remember, learning English is not just about grammar or vocabulary. It's also about understanding the world around you. By listening to episodes like this, you are improving your comprehension, expanding your vocabulary, and gaining insight into international relations, which is both educational and practical.
Yes, and it's important to keep practicing every day. Even a few minutes of reading, listening, or speaking in English can make a big difference over time. Try summarizing today's episode in your own words, or discuss it with friends to strengthen your understanding and speaking skills.
Finally, dear listeners, thank you for staying with us throughout this long and detailed discussion. We hope you have learned not only about the complex relationship between the United States and China, but also about how global events affect all of us, and how you can use this knowledge to improve your English in a meaningful way.
Exactly, Julia. Your dedication to learning English while exploring real-world topics is inspiring. Keep practicing, keep asking questions, and stay curious about the world. And of course, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the English Globe, and share your thoughts in the comments. We love hearing where our listeners are from and what you think about today's topic.
Yes, Adam. And remember, every conversation, every article, and every episode you listen to is a step toward becoming more confident in English and more aware of global events. We are proud of your progress and look forward to exploring more fascinating topics with you in the next episodes.
So, dear listeners, stay curious, keep learning, and remember that understanding the world helps you understand English better, and understanding English helps you understand the world. Thank you for joining us today, and we'll see you in our next episode on the English Globe.
Goodbye for now, and keep practicing, because every small effort in learning English brings you closer to your goals.